Clara had always been fascinated by history, the kind of history buried under layers of dust and forgotten by time. So, when she first heard about the village of Eldertide, a place steeped in mystery and abandoned for reasons no one could fully explain, her curiosity got the better of her. The whispers of a cursed well at its center intrigued her more than she cared to admit. As she made her way through the overgrown path leading to the village, the trees seemed to close in around her, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. By the time she arrived, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the village bathed in an eerie twilight. The village itself was like something out of a forgotten tale. Moss-covered stones lined the narrow streets, and the houses, though still standing, appeared lifeless. Their windows were dark, and the doors hung askew on rusted hinges. Clara felt a chill run down her spine as she walked further in, the silence pressing in on her from all sides. It was as if the village itself was holding its breath, waiting. The well was easy to find, its stone rim barely visible beneath the thick vines that had overtaken it. There was an air of ancient sorrow about it, a sense that whatever secrets it held, they were not meant to be uncovered. Despite the warnings she had heard, Clara couldn't resist. She approached the well with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The closer she got, the more she felt as if the air around her was thickening, becoming almost tangible. She peered over the edge, expecting to see nothing but darkness. Instead, she was met with the faintest glimmer of water far below, its surface unnaturally still. As she leaned in closer, a faint whisper seemed to rise from the depths, a sound so soft it could have been mistaken for the wind. But Clara knew better. This was something else, something older and far more malevolent. Her breath caught in her throat as the whisper grew louder, forming words she couldn't quite make out. It was as if the well itself was speaking to her, calling her to uncover the truth hidden in its depths. Clara hesitated, a part of her screaming to turn back, but her curiosity was a beast that couldn't be tamed. She reached for her flashlight, the beam cutting through the encroaching darkness as she began her descent. The stone steps were slick with moisture, each one more treacherous than the last. As she descended, the temperature dropped sharply, and the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The further she went, the more oppressive the darkness became, pressing in on her from all sides. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were no longer just whispers, but voices, dozens of them, all speaking at once. They seemed to echo from the very walls of the well, surrounding her, filling her mind with their desperate pleas. Clara tried to block them out, focusing on her footsteps, but it was no use. The voices were inescapable, a cacophony of sorrow and pain that threatened to overwhelm her. She could feel their despair, their anger, as if it were her own. When she finally reached the bottom, she was greeted by a small circular chamber. The walls were lined with what appeared to be ancient carvings, their meanings lost to time. The well's water was before her, a still dark pool that reflected nothing but emptiness. Clara felt a sense of dread settle in her chest, a heavy weight that made it hard to breathe. She knew she shouldn't be here, that she had ventured too far into something she couldn't understand. But it was too late to turn back now. The well had her, and it wasn't going to let her go. As she stood there, staring into the abyss, something began to stir within the water. At first, it was just a ripple, a slight disturbance that sent tiny waves lapping against the stone edge. But then, the water began to churn violently, as if something deep below was trying to break free. Clara took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. The voices around her grew louder, more frantic, as if they were warning her of what was to come. She wanted to run, to get as far away from this place as possible, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. The water continued to swirl, and from its depths, a figure began to emerge. Clara's breath hitched as she watched it rise, a shadowy form that seemed to be made of the very darkness itself. It had no defined features, just a mass of shifting shadows that reached out towards her. The air grew colder, and Clara felt a chill run down her spine as the figure drew closer. The voices were a deafening roar now, filling her mind with images of pain and suffering. She could feel their anguish, as if it were her own, a never-ending cycle of despair that threatened to consume her. Clara stumbled back, her flashlight flickering as the figure loomed over her. She could feel its presence, a cold, suffocating weight that pressed down on her chest. The whispers in her mind grew more insistent, urging her to leave, to run while she still could. But Clara was frozen in place, unable to tear her eyes away from the shadowy figure. It was as if she was caught in its thrall, unable to escape the pull of the well's dark secrets. The figure reached out towards her, its hand or what passed, for one hovering just inches from her face. Suddenly, the figure stopped, its attention shifting to something behind Clara. She turned slowly, her movements sluggish, as if she were moving through water. There, standing at the edge of the chamber, was another figure, a man, his features obscured by the darkness. Clara's heart skipped a beat as she recognized him. He was one of the villagers she had seen in the old photographs, the ones that had been left behind when the village was abandoned. He looked at her with hollow eyes, his expression a mask of sorrow. And then, without a word, he turned and walked towards the water. Clara watched in horror as the man stepped into the pool, the water rippling around him as he sank into its depths. The shadowy figure followed him, disappearing into the darkness without a trace. The whispers in Clara's mind quieted, leaving her alone in the suffocating silence of the chamber. She felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was short-lived. The water began to churn again, and from its depths, more figures emerged, dozens of them, all with the same hollow eyes and sorrowful expressions. They surrounded her, their presence a cold, suffocating weight that pressed down on her from all sides. Clara backed away, her heart pounding in her chest as the figures closed in on her. She could feel their despair, their anger, as if it were her own. They reached out towards her, their hands cold as ice as they brushed against her skin. The whispers returned, filling her mind with their desperate pleas. Clara tried to block them out, but it was no use. The voices were inescapable, a never-ending chorus of sorrow and pain that threatened to overwhelm her. She could feel their anguish as if it were her own, a heavy weight that made it hard to breathe. The figures continued to close in, their presence suffocating. Clara could feel their cold hands grasping at her, pulling her towards the well. She fought against them, but it was no use. They were too strong, their grip unrelenting. The whispers in her mind grew louder, more insistent, urging her to give in, to let go. Clara's vision blurred, her strength waning as the figures dragged her towards the water. She could feel the cold seeping into her bones, the darkness closing in around her. And then, just as she was about to be pulled into the water, she heard a voice clearer than the rest, cutting through the cacophony of whispers. The voice was soft, almost gentle, and it called her name. Clara's heart skipped a beat as she recognized it. It was her grandmother's voice, the one she had heard so many times as a child, comforting her in the dark. The sound of it gave her strength, a flicker of hope in the overwhelming darkness. She fought against the figures, their grip loosening as the voice grew louder, more insistent. Clara pushed forward, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she broke free from their grasp. The figures recoiled, their forms dissolving into the shadows as the voice continued to call her name. Clara stumbled back, her heart racing as she tried to catch her breath. The chamber was empty now, the figures gone, but the oppressive weight of the well's presence remained. The water was still, the surface smooth and undisturbed. But Clara knew better. She could feel the darkness lurking beneath, waiting for its next victim. The voice that had saved her faded into the distance, leaving her alone once more. But Clara was different now. She had seen the well's true nature, had felt the weight of its curse, and she knew she couldn't leave it behind. Clara made her way back up the stone steps, her body trembling with exhaustion. The whispers were gone, the oppressive darkness lifted, but the memory of what she had experienced lingered in her mind. She emerged from the well into the cool night air, the village of Eldertide, silent around her. The houses were still lifeless, the streets empty, but Clara felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt before. She knew the well was still there, lurking in the shadows, but it no longer had a hold on her. She had faced the darkness and come out the other side. As she stood there, breathing in the crisp night air, Clara realized that she couldn't leave the village behind. She had uncovered its secrets, had seen the pain and suffering that had been hidden for so long. And she knew she had a responsibility to tell the world what she had found. The well's curse was not just a story. It was real, and it had claimed the lives of countless others before her. Clara couldn't let that happen again. She had to find a way to break the cycle, to put an end to the well's dark influence once and for all. Clara spent the next few days researching the village's history, poring over old records and documents in search of answers. She learned that the well had been a source of life for the village for centuries, providing them with water even in times of drought. But something had changed over the years, something that had turned the well's water into a source of sorrow and despair. The villagers had tried to keep the truth hidden, had buried the well's dark history beneath layers of superstition and fear. But the truth had a way of coming to light. As Clara delved deeper into the village's past, she uncovered a story that sent chills down her spine. According to the old records, the well had been cursed by a woman who had been wronged by the villagers. She had been accused of witchcraft and thrown into the well, left to drown in its dark waters. But before she died, she had cursed the well, vowing that it would bring sorrow and pain to all who drank from it. The villagers had tried to cover up her death, had buried the truth along with her body, but the curse had taken root. Clara knew she was dealing with something far older and more powerful than she had anticipated. The well was not just a source of water, it was a portal to something darker. Something that fed on the pain and suffering of those who dared to venture too close. Clara realized that the figures she had seen in the well were the spirits of those who had fallen victim to its curse, trapped in an endless cycle of despair. They were not just memories. They were real, and they were still trapped in the well, unable to move on. Clara knew she had to find a way to free them, to break the curse that had held them captive for so long. She spent days researching ancient rituals and spells, searching for anything that might help her put an end to the well's dark influence. But the more she learned, the more she realized how dangerous her task would be. The well was not just cursed, it was alive, feeding on the pain and suffering of those who ventured too close. Clara knew she was risking her own life by trying to break the curse, but she couldn't turn back now. Clara returned to the well one last time, armed with the knowledge she had gained from her research. She stood at the edge, the stone rim cold beneath her fingers, and took a deep breath. She knew what she had to do, but the thought of descending into the darkness again filled her with dread. The well's presence was as oppressive as ever, the air thick with the scent of decay. But Clara was determined. She had come too far to turn back now. She began her descent, the stone steps slick and treacherous beneath her feet. The darkness closed in around her as she descended, the air growing colder with each step. The whispers returned, faint at first but growing louder as she went deeper. Clara could feel the well's presence pressing in on her, a suffocating weight that made it hard to breathe. But she kept going, her flashlight cutting through the darkness as she made her way to the bottom. The chamber was just as she had left it, the carvings on the walls barely visible in the dim light. The water was still, the surface smooth and undisturbed. But Clara knew better. Clara took a deep breath and began the ritual, chanting the ancient words she had learned from her research. The air around her seemed to thicken, the darkness pressing in on her from all sides. The water began to ripple, tiny waves lapping against the stone edge. Clara could feel the presence of the spirits, their sorrow and despair weighing heavily on her mind. She pushed forward, her voice growing stronger as she continued the chant. The water began to churn, and from its depths, the figures began to emerge once more. But this time, Clara was not afraid. The figures surrounded her, their hollow eyes fixed on her as she continued the ritual. Clara could feel their pain, their anger, but she did not waver. She knew what she had to do. The final words of the ritual echoed through the chamber, and the figures began to dissolve, their forms dissipating into the shadows. The water stilled, the air grew quiet, and for a moment, Clara thought she had succeeded. But then, a shadowy figure rose from the water, larger and more menacing than the others. Clara's heart raced as she recognized it, the woman who had cursed the well. The figure loomed over her, its presence suffocating. Clara could feel the weight of its anger, its hatred, as if it were her own. The whispers in her mind grew louder, filling her with a sense of dread. But Clara did not back down. She continued the ritual, her voice steady and strong as she faced the figure. The air around her crackled with energy, the darkness swirling around them as the ritual reached its climax. The figure let out a scream, a sound so filled with pain and sorrow that it made Clara's heart ache. The scream echoed through the chamber, the walls trembling with the force of it. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet as the figure began to dissolve, its form disintegrating into the darkness. The water churned violently, waves crashing against the stone edge as the figure was pulled back into the depths. Clara's voice faltered as the last of the figure disappeared, leaving her alone in the silence. The well's presence was gone, the air clear and still, but Clara felt no relief. She had done what she had set out to do, but the weight of the well's curse still hung heavy on her heart. Clara made her way back up the stone steps, her body trembling with exhaustion. The village of Eldertide was silent around her, the houses lifeless and dark. The well was behind her now, its dark influence broken, but Clara knew she could never truly escape its shadow. She had seen too much, had felt the weight of its curse, and she knew that the memories of what she had experienced would stay with her forever. But she also knew that she had done the right thing. The spirits were free now, their suffering finally at an end, and the well's dark influence was broken. Clara left the village of Eldertide behind, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had done. The road back to civilization was long and winding, the overgrown path twisting through the dense forest. Clara walked in silence, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath her feet. She could feel the village's presence fading behind her, the weight of its dark history lifting from her shoulders. But as she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The trees seemed to close in around her, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Clara quickened her pace, her breath coming in short gasps as she tried to shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her chest. The village was behind her, but its shadow still lingered in her mind. She could feel its presence, a dark weight that pressed down on her from all sides. But Clara kept walking, her steps steady as she made her way through the forest. The whispers in her mind were gone. The oppressive darkness lifted, but the memory of what she had experienced lingered. And as she walked, she couldn't help but wonder if she had truly escaped the well's curse, or if it had simply followed her into the world beyond. The days passed in a blur after Clara left Eldertide. She tried to return to her normal life, but the memories of the well haunted her, lurking in the corners of her mind. She couldn't sleep without hearing the whispers, couldn't close her eyes without seeing the shadowy figures reaching out to her. The weight of the well's curse hung heavy on her heart, a constant reminder of the darkness she had faced. Clara knew she couldn't keep going like this, that she had to find a way to move on. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the feeling that the well was still with her. Clara's friends noticed the change in her. They asked her what was wrong, why she seemed so distant. But Clara couldn't bring herself to tell them the truth. How could she explain what she had seen, what she had experienced? They would think she was crazy, that the village of Eldertide had driven her mad. So Clara kept it to herself, burying the memories deep within her mind. But no matter how hard she tried to forget, the well's presence was always there, a dark shadow that followed her wherever she went. The nightmares began a few weeks after Clara returned home. They started out small, a sense of unease, a feeling of being watched. But soon they grew into something much darker. Clara would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her heart racing as if she had just escaped from some unseen terror. The whispers were back, louder and more insistent than before. And Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the well was calling to her. She tried to ignore it, to push the memories to the back of her mind, but the nightmares only grew worse. Clara knew she couldn't keep living like this. The well's curse had followed her home, and she didn't know how much longer she could take it. She spent hours researching, trying to find a way to break the curse, to free herself from the well's dark influence. But the more she learned, the more hopeless she felt. The curse was ancient, its roots buried deep in the village's history. And Clara was just one person. How could she hope to stand against something so powerful, so deeply entrenched in the fabric of Eldertide? Clara considered going back to the village to confront the well one last time. But the thought filled her with dread. She had barely escaped with her life the first time, and she wasn't sure she could face the darkness again. But the nightmares wouldn't stop, the whispers growing louder and more insistent with each passing day. Clara knew she couldn't keep running, couldn't keep hiding from the truth. She had to face the well again, to find a way to break the curse once and for all, or she would never be free. Clara returned to Eldertide under the cover of darkness, the village as silent and lifeless as it had been the first time she arrived. The well stood in the center, its dark presence a weight on the village's heart. Clara felt a sense of dread as she approached, but she didn't stop. She had come too far to turn back now. She stood at the edge of the well, the stone rim cold beneath her fingers, and took a deep breath. The whispers were back, louder and more insistent than before. But Clara didn't let them get to her. She had a plan, and she was determined to see it through. Clara began the ritual again, the ancient words flowing from her lips as if they had been etched into her memory. The air around her seemed to thicken, the darkness pressing in on her from all sides. The well's presence was stronger than before, its dark influence seeping into her mind. But Clara didn't waver. She could feel the spirits gathering around her, their sorrow and despair a weight on her soul. But she kept going. The water began to ripple, tiny waves lapping against the stone edge, and Clara knew she was getting closer. The ritual reached its climax, and the water began to churn violently, waves crashing against the stone as the figures began to emerge once more. But this time Clara was ready. She faced the spirits with a steely resolve, her voice steady as she continued the ritual. The figures surrounded her, their hollow eyes fixed on her as they reached out. But Clara didn't back down. She knew what she had to do. The final words of the ritual echoed through the chamber, and the figures began to dissolve, their forms dissipating into the shadows. The well's presence was fading, the darkness lifting, and Clara knew she was close. As the last of the spirits faded into the darkness, Clara felt a sense of relief wash over her. The well was silent, its dark influence broken, and Clara knew she had done what she had set out to do. She had freed the spirits, had broken the curse that had held them captive for so long. But as she turned to leave, she felt a chill run down her spine. The well was still there, its dark presence lingering in the air. Clara knew she had done what she could, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the well's curse wasn't truly broken, that it was still waiting, biding its time. Clara left Eldertide behind for the last time, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had done. The road back to civilization was long and winding, the overgrown path twisting through the dense forest. Clara walked in silence, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath her feet. She could feel the village's presence fading behind her, the weight of its dark history lifting from her shoulders. But as she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The trees seemed to close in around her, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. And as she stepped onto the road that would take her back to the world she had left behind, Clara knew that the well's curse was far from over, that it had simply followed her into the world beyond.